Today I'm talking with two renowned journalists, Reiter and Wilkes, about their new book, Broken Republic, or in German, Totally Kaputt.
We knew that there were problems underneath the surface. Germany's crisis just became impossible to ignore.
We've been writing quite a few stories about the challenges facing Germany, but a 1,000-word article didn't seem enough. You could tell that people weren't happy with where things are going. The economy was going through a very difficult patch. Perhaps society wasn't quite as cohesive or as happy as people were portraying it.
The mainstream response is basically paralysis. It's kind of just shock and beyond shock.
So what historical patterns and cultural reflexes are preventing the country from adapting for the future? What exactly keeps us from going there?
Germany hasn't formed a robust post-war identity that really binds the country together. So the core problem is really like that the German nation is still built on a very fragile foundation. What is the goal? Like, what is the vision? What is the German dream here?
What's the most likely path back to strength? What would a success story look like, really? I mean, Bloomberg style.
A success story would be
Yeah, hello and welcome to a new Courage Skyline Talk. And today I'm talking with two renowned journalists, Reiter and Wilkes, about their new book, Broken Republic, or in German, Totally Kaputt. And I have to say, I mean, the book is sharp. And sometimes for a German, it is painfully open, but very, very positive, because you have a diagnosis of a modern Germany. You call it fragmented, risk-averse, and stuck in the past. But I know you don't mean it negatively, because you both have a close affinity really to Germany, and you even come up towards the end of the book with really concrete proposals what Germany could do differently. So this is really, I have to say, very impressive. There were some things in there that I honestly did not know about. But before we dive into the book, I really would like to understand from the two of you. I'd like to introduce you not only as Bloomberg journalists, but also as people with a high affinity to Germany. And I'd like to understand what exactly motivated you to write this book. Was it your boss who said at Bloomberg, hey, you have to write a book, or is there more behind it? Yeah, I mean, with Chris, with you, for example, and no, right? You have a background from Austria, your grandfather. You grew up in the United States, in Chicago, and then in the South. What motivated you to do this?
Yeah, well, my personal background is, so I mean, I had German dual citizenship basically from birth, because my father had a German citizenship. My father's a cook, so I grew up on Knödel and Spätzle, so in suburban Chicago, alongside normal American fare. So it was like I was kind of like in a way bicultural from the beginning. So I at some point in my 20s I like declared my German citizenship, and so like, okay, I'll come over and that'll be nice. And so what brought us though to like, so I've been living here altogether like over like 20 years. I first came in 1999, so it's been quite a while. I've actually lived in Berlin longer than anywhere else. But one of the things that like brought Will and I, like we'd worked together on a lot of stories, and it was definitely our own initiative, and Will kind of got the ball rolling, was that and it kind of came about after the energy crisis in like the 2022, 2023 winter, when there was fears before that Germany was going to have to like shut down factories, and then there was going to have to ration gas. And so that was kind of the starting point where we thought like, and then Germany made it through the winter without having, there was no drama really. Like it made it through. LNG helped, a lot of things helped, warm weather helped. So it was kind of this point where Germany had made it through yet another crisis and seems to like keep rolling. And then for the two of us who have like covered Germany for a long time, and like both from an outsider, like from an insider perspective, that we're here in Germany and covering German companies and German politics, but also as just normal people that live here and have to deal with daily life, that for us, we could feel that like we knew that there were problems underneath the surface. And so the original idea came about that we had to like describe the hidden crisis underneath the veneer of stability in Germany. And then so like in the process of researching that and working on that idea for a book, Germany's crisis just became impossible to ignore. So, and then that shifted into like sort of the bigger issues that Germany faces. So, like the economy is part of it, but then the politics and the social side that like sort of all kind of mixes and are linked together.
I see. Did I get this right? Will, you initiated the book, the idea?
Yeah, we'd actually just done a tour of a steel plant together. We were in Salzgitter, looking at how the company planned to convert to hydrogen production, and had kind of met with some workers and some bosses, and we just had a coffee afterwards. And I think we've been writing quite a few stories about the challenges facing Germany, but it kind of a 1,000-word article didn't seem enough, because also because all these problems were having kind of reverberations with each other. You had talking to a lot of Germans. I think by then you could tell that people weren't happy with where things are going. The economy was going through a very difficult patch, and it still is in that difficult patch, and there was no way you could kind of see of it coming out. It was also kind of towards the tail end of coronavirus, which I thought was an interesting experience for Germany and also other European countries. But Germany had is perceived to have had a very good start to the coronavirus crisis. And I think whereas towards the end, when you came to vaccines, you could see that the population was actually quite divided, and it all got quite bad-tempered, and there was a lot of kind of the things like wearing masks lasted here for longer than everywhere else. You had like citizens were very concerned about taking the vaccine and things like that. And you could just have this kind of sense that perhaps society wasn't quite as cohesive or as happy as people were portraying it. And a lot of this, I think, honestly, a lot of Germans privately were talking about that, and it was a thing you encountered talking to German friends. Like, I'm a bit concerned where the country's headed. Obviously, the AfD was rising quite steadily in the polls and has gone even higher since. And I think that was a great kind of concern to people. And it just seemed to bring all this together. We needed to do something bigger than just an article. And then I kind of proposed the idea to Chris, and we've like Chris said, we've worked a lot together on pieces. I think we have a similar way of reporting things and of viewing things, and but we're both very much committed Germanophiles, and I think that was the reason also for writing the book. It's a country where we have family ties, we have kind of deeply love and respect, and you can kind of see it, as I think a lot of people can see in recent years, and maybe a bit before, it's been going down a darker and trickier path. And it was from out of this kind of love and concern for the country that we wanted to do something that would kind of set out the problems and solutions.
So we have the American and the British view on Germany. And Will, do you actually have German ancestors as well?
Not no, not confirmed.
Austrian?
Not confirmed. On my grandma's side, I wasn't able to confirm it, but there's some signs that people that on my granddad's side, my maternal grandmother's side, that they might have come from Aachen and then moved to Manchester in the north of England. But I wasn't able to confirm that for the book, and the records are a bit mixed. But my sister
What
also
brought you to Germany again?
I came here for work. I kind of have long really liked Germany, and I worked here as a student on and off. And then I was kind of getting a bit tired of London and visiting cities like Frankfurt. And I lived in London, and I was getting
much better Frankfurt than London, right?
That's a really interesting discussion. I think obviously London has a lot more to offer than Frankfurt, but actually Frankfurt, I think maybe we get onto this later. I think Frankfurt's really unfairly underrated by people who haven't lived here. But yeah, so that I came here for work, and because I really kind of love and find Germany an interesting place to live.
Okay, cool. Yeah, before we now dive with the first question, may I ask you a question directly? Because my background is advertising, right? And I noticed that the English version, you show the beetle on the book. And in the German version, it is the Gartenzwerg.
Yeah.
Is there a reason behind it?
Well, I thought that was interesting. I mean, so so the publishers, like
Yeah.
they came up with the covers, which I thought, so it's two different publishing houses. It's Bloomsbury in the UK and it's Piper here in Germany. And so I thought it was like a really interesting, like, so they both approach like what is a symbol for Germany.
Yeah.
So and so in like outside of Germany, it's German engineering, a car, Volkswagen Beetle. So like that's what it is. And I thought it was funny that the German publisher, like their image of Germany was a Gartenzwerg. And I've seen
Yes.
that also in other places too, where representing Germany, like Germans' representation of themselves is often a Gartenzwerg. So I thought that was like, so it was kind of just they approached it in different ways, but came to, like totally different symbols of,
Mhm.
from the outside view, it's German engineering, and in Germany it's a Gartenzwerg.
Interesting, interesting,
Yeah.
right? It also says a lot, right?
Yeah.
Okay, let's get to the first question. Your book really opens, at least the German version, with a bold verdict. Germany is totally kaputt. In one sentence, what is the core diagnosis? What's kaputt? What is broken?
That's a good first question. In one sentence, it's kind of hard, but like, I mean, first of all, like we'll start at like that. The question mark is there, we're trying to leave it open. The risk is that Germany gets totally kaput. And I think like the core of Germany's problems is that it hasn't like the book is a lot about identity, that Germany hasn't formed a robust post-war identity that really binds the country together. And so like our concerns is that as we've seen with the rise of the AfD, that without sort of a civic sort of bond that like allows people to, develop a positive affiliation and association with Germany and the country and wanting to, of what Germany means for them. And that's been left rather thin, intentionally so for many decades. But so the core problem is really like that the German nation is still built on a very fragile foundation. So that's what we kind of like for us is the red thread that runs through these various layers of problems or
Mhm.
these various facets of problems. So like in a nutshell, that's the main message, that Germany has like an identity issue and it needs to address that issue, because otherwise, like right now, what we're seeing with Merz, like the hundreds of billions of euros that
Mhm.
are put forth to like fix problems that are really there and that need to be addressed. But if also at the same time, but these are long-term issues. If you look at Stuttgart 21 or like the BER, airport in Berlin, these are issues like infrastructure or whatever. It takes a long time to get those up and running. And so in the meantime, you still have to have people like find what is the goal, like what is the vision, what is the German dream here? Like how do we as Germans like, because we're Germans as much as, as everyone else here in the country, that like, how do we navigate this country and feel like that we belong and that are a part of it and that we belong together? So um, that's the concern, is that as this money gets spent, or as these like, if it's not part of a broader vision and of other ways,
Mhm.
and other ways aren't also created to bring people together, the risk is that this money gets spent and people still are frustrated at the end of it, but there's no more money to spend. Like that's the big risk, kind of looking forward.
Oh, interesting.
And just to add to that, if you consider what we kind of mean about this kind of fractured or fragmented identity, it's just that, in Germany, there's quite often like regional traditions or regional kind of acts of togetherness and identity, but you don't have, I think the most obvious one just to go into is the kind of division between East and West. I mean, that nominally that it's one country, it's the Federal Republic, but there's just immense differences, and you often, I think that you really notice as a foreigner in Germany that a lot of people in the West, unless you've got family ties, don't really have connections or friends in the East. And often find with work, I know East Germany better than from traveling to places like Leuna or the Lausitz than quite often the West German friends do and go more regularly. And it's also this, and when you go to the East, you often, and it's quite interesting as a foreigner, you often, if you get into a chat and the discussion, they realize you're English, they'll start complaining about Westerners, West Germans, and it's very obvious that there's kind of these fragmented identities, and you can also see that increase. It's not just an East-West thing. There's kind of new divisions between people who live in cities and countryside, and you get into very difficult and kind of bitter discussions about things like cars between people in cities who want one thing, and then people in the countryside one different approach to kind of restricting cars. And it's just, it seems like there's lots of these different divisions and nothing that pulls people together as kind of one Germany.
Okay, and if you would look at the West separately, are there things that keep us together in the West, and are there things in the East that keep them together? So is it an East-West kind of thing, or is there more behind it?
I don't think it's just East-West. I think, I mean, East-West is like a very significant divide for sure,
Yeah,
but I think it's not just East-West. I mean, because the main bonds, like, this is just a bit kind of blunt,
yeah,
presented, but for West Germany, like, which defines total Germany really, was that, so it was not Nazi, like that. So that's kind of the core, like, post-war, that it's post-Nazi Germany. It's a
mhm,
liberated country, and then Wohlstand für alle, so shared prosperity. And and beyond that, there's very little efforts that bring people together, like that. And so, like, and the idea of Wohlstand für alle, I mean, that continues to be sort of presented. Merz just said it in the Bundestag recently,
yeah,
that's the goal. But the problem is, like, this, like, that doesn't really hold water anymore. And
mm,
with wealth inequality, widening, and the social system being sort of undermined and gutted, and sort of the way taxation is structured more towards work rather than wealth, and that you have, and the lack of opportunity for people on average incomes to, like, buy their own home, to accumulate a sense of wealth and a sense of financial independence on their own, like that undermining that aspiration just isn't enough, and it doesn't really hold water. Like, so, if you're like, and that's why it's so fragile. Like, that's one of the
mm,
issues, that if you can't replace that or strengthen that or flank that with, like, other ideas or ways of feeling positive besides just personal prosperity, you get a country that becomes very divided and very, like, fragmented, fractured, that struggles to hold together. And that's sort of like the risk that we see.
I see. Yeah, and you mentioned Friedrich Merz, and he's talking Wohlstand für alle, but you're saying this is not sufficient, money alone. We need more. I
Yeah.
understand we need a vision, or we need a mission. And you say that Germany needs a unifier, but instead it got a chancellor whose instincts are to really divide. What exactly do you mean by that? And how is it visible really under Friedrich Merz? I mean, you mentioned also in your book John F. Kennedy. He was a real unifier, and he had a vision, I think, with the moonshot, right?
Hmm.
So how do you see this role with Merz? Why don't you see him as a unifier?
Well, I mean, I think, like, his history, for instance, like the Deutsche Leitkultur, sort of this idea that there's a German leading culture, and that there's, like, guiding culture, and there's principles behind it, and it's like those values are one thing, but like, the concept of German leading culture is, like, culture is pretty divisive if you're not, a ethnic native of this country. Like, I'm as ethnic native as anyone, really, but it's the idea, like, but my German's not perfect, like, because I grew up speaking English, and so my German's fluent and I can talk to anybody. I won't get every single der die das right, and
Yeah,
never will, right? And so that's one of the things. So there's, like, issues that, like, that makes it very hard to be German, to feel accepted, and sort of a concept that Merz has propagated in terms of this Deutsche Leitkultur,
yeah,
is divisive, from the outset. And then, like, some of his concepts that he's over, like, recent years, where he's belittled migrants, called Ukrainian war refugees social tourists, and complained about kleine Pashas of like migrant children and things like that. So like this is a language and a rhetoric that's divisive, but you know, on the other hand, it's like, how do you bring people together? And that's like, and those methods of, you know, like the Deutsche Leitkultur is one of these concepts that is quite, you know, you're sort of saying that there's a pure Germany and then there's
Yeah.
everybody else. And migrants have to give up whatever identity they had before and become pure Germans. And so where like our kind of, we use the imagery of like a Schwarzwaldkuchen, you know, like Black Forest cake that like it's layered, you know, and so is
Right.
identity, you know, so you can have like a nice like frosting on top that kind of connects everybody together in terms of, you know, how they feel about each other. That doesn't mean you have to give up other things. So like just to like, so Merz and his like division, I mean, the Deutsche Leitkultur is one of the things that's been one of his like rallying cries. It's part of the CDU party program these days.
But
The
Chris, may I
Grundsatzprogramm.
ask, this was in the past. Do you think there's any change happening right now with him being elected as Chancellor? I mean, he learned as well, right? He changed to a big degree.
Yeah, I mean, I will say like I was pleasantly surprised in his speech in Parliament that he finally said that he's like the chancellor for all 84 million Germans. Because that had that like through from that wasn't his campaign, it wasn't his in the after that campaign in the coalition talk. So he did come up and say that he's going to be the chancellor for all 84 million Germans. So I think that's positive. So there are steps that could be seen that yeah but I think that I do think that dialogue between politics and people has to like take place a little bit more.
Yeah.
That it's still like a very, you know, like Larissa said, it's too much a top down and people feel sort of talked down to from politics instead of really incorporated into the system. But he has learned and he has like, you know, he's more pro-European, he was more transatlantic before. So the tone is shifted and that's like a positive. So, you know, we'll see what happens.
Yeah, I mean, we don't want to talk politics, right? I mean, you are both experts in it, but it's still, on the other hand, part of the book, right? And you're talking about a unifier. Will, you want to say something there, right?
Now, I was just going to add perhaps one optimistic thing from, as I'm sure your viewers will be familiar, a few weeks ago, he lost, what was a complete shock to everyone, he lost the first vote to become Chancellor because some people either in his party or in the Social Democrats voted against him, and you can I think it's fair to hope that that was a signal that, you know, going forward you can't he's going to have to be more of a unifier, otherwise this government's not going to last very long, or we're going to see a lot more kind of failed votes on important issues. So I think, yeah, you can be optimistic, and that might be one thing that forces him to be a bit more of a unifier, and the people around him realize, you know, your chancellorship, Germany's fractured, we've got a lot of things we need to do, this government doesn't have a very big majority, the AfD are looking forward and looking for any opportunity to embarrass us, you know, you've got to be more inclusive and more warm and open and optimistic. But then again, I mean, you also unfortunately saw in this first week as well, he was kind of at the Wirtschaftsrat, he was making kind of comments about, you know, the idea of work-life balance is vorbei, and these kind of these kind of comments.
Have you been there, Will?
No, I wasn't there, but I did see
I can see you, yeah.
I did see some of the. Oh, you were there.
Yeah, I was there. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, it's interesting, and obviously, an element of Germany's situation will involve hard work especially on economy, to get things out. But when you have a social democratic kind of left-wing partners, and you need to reach out to all Germans, and kind of Germans who are struggling despite working quite hard, and young people who are worried about their future, perhaps the language could be more positive in trying to get people to reach higher up, instead of kind of saying like, you know, forget about work-life balance, you know,
Yeah,
a more
it's not
positive
very.
message would be good.
It is, you know. But you say we need a unifier for Germany. Merz is very strong also on the transatlantic. He's a real transatlanticist, and he tries to take a more important role within Europe. So I was really wondering, but that's my thinking. How helpful is it if each country has a strong mission and vision, and on the other hand, on a meta-ebene, we want to combine all the countries on a European level? These are two tough jobs. Make a vision for Germany, lead it forward, and on the other hand, have a European vision. Because the more strong the visions per each country are, the more diversified we also may be.
Yeah, I mean, to me, I don't think it has to be like either or. Like I think it can be both and. And I also think like Germany can't really, you know, provide a lot of leadership if it's not unified itself. Like if it doesn't have its own like house in order and its own direction, its own kind of sense of confidence and
Good point.
well-being, then it has like then it can talk on the European level and push like for more integration on the European level from a position of strength and a position of confidence rather than, because the risk is if you have like a half-hearted, sort of national unity and you always have to, your ability to like push things on the European stage like is more compromised. So the more unified Germany is and the more like sort of a cohesive whole it is, the easier it is for Germany to act on a European level and the better it is and the stronger it will be. So I don't think it's like they're exclusive. I think they're actually mutually supportive.
Yeah. And I think you see that across Western democracies when internal divisions get so big and there's no that really limits your leader's ability to act on the international stage. I mean, you can look at how Macron really struggled to say anything on the international stage during the Yellow Vest period, and also the United States is acting internationally in the way it is, partly because domestically it's so divided, and you have Trump has to appeal to his base of voters. And also in the UK, the UK's kind of internationally went missing after Brexit, partly because the Prime Minister at the time, Theresa May, had to deal with these immense kind of national divisions. So I think, I understand the point that you have to somehow be able to harmonize what you're doing nationally at the European and international level. But if you're so divided, and if Merz gets into a position where he's constantly having to look across his back because he might fail in a Bundestag vote, he's not going to be able to. That's going to limit his ability to act on the international stage as well.
Yeah, that makes totally sense. So let's hope Merz will be our unifier. It's mentioned as in your book. Another aspect you mention in your book is you say that that Germany is paralyzed by its past, and I suppose you mean the recent past, Second World War, the Nazi time. So what historical patterns and cultural reflexes are preventing the country from adapting for the future? What exactly keeps us from going there?
Well, I mean, there's a certain, one of the things we say in the book is that like Germany has accepted guilt, but not necessarily responsibility. And like in that sense, like that responsibility is an ongoing process. And then rather the guilt is like a one-off sort of issue. Like, okay, we've accepted guilt, but like responsibility is sort of involves vigilance. And that's more than kind of hashtag never again, that it has to like sort of like the country like needs it's because the whole memory culture is sort of like geared as like presenting the Holocaust as like a singularity in the history of humanity rather than as an event to learn from that also Germans themselves to learn from. And so like every time there's like right now in Palestine there's like kind of an uproar every time that's a genocide is mentioned in Gaza that it's becomes like something that Germany kind of goes into convulsions about that you can't equate what's happening with, and it's like Israel can't be involved, and it's sort of like this issue where, and I think it's like Germany struggles to deal with because it's like it really hasn't entirely processed that past, the nation's role and the role of the culture in actually facilitating the Holocaust. And I think like and that the fact that we're like 80 years after the end of World War II, and that Germany has like, and now it's like Germany and the Germans is like a very different country than it was at the end of World War II. And that's a good thing. And that to acknowledge that like diversity that Germany has kind of like, as as a win, and that it's good that Germany is a much more different place than it was, and that it's more diverse, and that then that there are positive things to draw also from Germany's past. That like Germany's history doesn't start in 1945 or 1949, whenever but that Germany has like as a nation, like that one of the things we kind of lift up like Weimar Republic is like it was a very diverse, very ambitious, like homegrown German democracy that it didn't survive because the guardrails weren't like strong enough. The country was still like young, but there's still like a lot of things that I think Germany can take as like positive, like that's also Germany, and that it doesn't have to be like this fear of the past because because one of the things if Germany is so like kind of like just I think banning too much of like Nazi slogans and Mein Kampf and things, it's sort of like you're not really willing to deal with it, like because if it allows those symbols to retain their power to provoke and to divide. And that's what's happening in Germany right now. And the mainstream is kind of, as the AfD and neo-Nazis, like not that they're always the same, but that there are forces, right-wing forces that are using like reviving those symbols.
Yeah.
And the mainstream response is basically paralysis. It's kind of just shock, and beyond shock, it doesn't know what else to do. But because like the mainstream has allowed those symbols to retain that power. And so that's like the process of how does the country move beyond that and like develop like a different way, and that like allows it to sort of be proud of itself without kind of feeling like it's automatically going into a nationalist direction, if
So
that
you
makes
mean we
sense.
have to embrace our past, our recent past more strongly, admit guilt,
Yeah.
to
And
move forward. So
yeah.
psychological healing effect, so to say.
Yeah, because I think because of the problems with like not really facing the past, not really owning up to it, is like that and this is what this like I've like Germany is like is like defends the present and the status quo, like so as the present and as what had defined Germany in the post-war period like gets is under threat, it struggles to pivot towards the future because the past, it's not comfortable with the past, so it doesn't know where it's come from, so it can't really see where it's going. And so I think those are things that like Germany has to like, okay, like own up to it a bit more in order to like
Yeah,
just, and it's not just the Holocaust. It's not just the Nazi period is when the country started. And there are problematic issues in the past. And so there's a responsibility towards like how Germany approaches itself. But then I think you can move forward and look forward, with a lot more comfort and ease and pride and self-confidence.
I
So that,
see. And Will, I mean, you writing also maybe what you were saying, Chris, right now, is that maybe one of our weaknesses? You're saying one of the biggest fears Germany is facing are admitting mistakes. So is this actually it? We have the fear to admit that we did a mistake there with the Nazi time and we don't embrace it. And is this what keeps us really, is that one of our most and biggest competitive risks now in Europe?
Whether Germany's not able to, that there's a kind of unwillingness to admit to mistakes in Germany.
Yeah, and this is also a reason why we don't admit the mistake of the past, right? The Second World War. We say it happened, but we don't really embrace it, like Chris was saying.
Yeah, there's perhaps a culture of a lack of reflection and openness, and it can sometimes, I think, also the approach to history, but also other things. There can be kind of there is like a fear of G Germany, and German society can often try and stick to uh, kind of structures that help you deal with that thing. Like you just draw a red line and say, look, the Federal Republic is something new and it's not connected to the Nazis. It's like a kind of draw a line in the sand from that. And then that kind of structure, that adherence to structure can go in. It is kind of part of German culture, and that people fear opening up and talking and kind of admitting mistakes, which you
Yeah,
can often see. There's kind of almost a kind of a severeness and kind of a rigidity that comes from, look, we have to stick to this structure, and then as long as you've said you've done that, you're kind of okay, and you can point to I've done that. When I really think, yeah, when you're trying to create new things, and build new things. And you know that as someone who's built their own business, you kind of need to be a bit more open and admitting where, you know, you've got things wrong. And also people, you know, being less fear of people judging you severely because you've tried something new or different. And that's to link that back to the competitive situation now. That's kind of, I think you can just to kind of turn around and start talking about German business and economy now. You can see that there is this fear among people. You know,
Yeah.
business startups have gone keep falling despite the need for a renewal in the economy, and it's kind of partly this kind of German fear of sticking your head out and trying something new, which again, if you were to embrace other parts of the past, I mean, we have in the book some really positive examples of like German Erfindergeist from
Mm.
like Bertha Benz's efforts to kind of popularize the car. I think we both really enjoyed working on that as an example of kind of like a German woman who like partly ignored the rules, partly ignored social stigma, and took
Yeah.
Carl Benz's motor car and
Amazing. Very
drove it
modern
around.
woman back then.
Yeah, yeah, but that's a kind of spirit of inventiveness that Germany needs to rediscover to get out of it, perhaps its economic and social holes, is some of this kind of a bit more like devil may care attitude and kind of taking risks and trying new things. And it's also a thing that there was in the creativity of the Weimar period that wasn't about kind of sticking to hard and set rules. It was kind of opening it up, having a more playful approach. And you wonder whether the whole society could benefit from returning to some of those kind of more playful, risk-taking, less judgmental things that allow people to kind of
Totally.
open up and be more creative.
Yeah, no, very interesting. I have to say, I totally agree to many, many points. Reading through your book, also, I nodded and said, yes, good reason, good explanation, you know. And would love to learn more and also and even better understand, you know. So, what exactly are we doing differently? For example, I mean, one should never compare, but if you look at Great Britain and the Commonwealth, right? There's a lot of things that went wrong there as well. But what exactly did they do better, and what could we do better to digest our past more actively and move forward? And did they really do it much better than we do? Or maybe they have
No,
a different mentality handling it overall.
yeah, I would point out I point out there that this book, it does not say that Germany does things worse than anywhere else, and
Which is fine. We can always learn, right?
yeah, yeah, yeah,
Yeah.
of course, but definitely the point of the book is not a generalized thing to say that Germany is worse than the United Kingdom or the United States. That's absolutely not at all
Right.
our point. And I think we do point to in the book that you know, the UK and the US have had problems too, and those countries, at least in Germany, there was some attempt to come to terms with bad things that they've done that have happened in German history. In the UK, we've kind of very there've been like fitful attempts to try and deal with that, and it's there's also unresolved tensions around there. And you can look at it in terms of what's going on in the Middle East and between India and Pakistan. Those are due to you know, those are due to the
Yeah, lots. But they're more
Britain.
daring, right? They're more daring, they're more open. Germans are always very hesitant, and
Yeah.
it's true. And
If I could just give an example, like, sorry, not to interrupt, but it just like what you're saying about like, so I was in New York like a couple months ago, and you know, like I was at like ground zero, you know, and there's these moving memorials to the tragedy of the World Trade Center, and there's this fountain that like disappears into the ground where the foundations of the Twin Towers were.
Mm,
It's very moving, it's very somber, so it recognizes that. Um, that moment, that like national tragedy that took place and what that represents. But at the same time, directly next door is like this cathedral to consumerism. You know, it's so,
yeah,
and this juxtaposition
I
of
went shopping
like,
there.
yeah, the Oculus, right? And then there's the shining, the new tower there. And
Mm,
so it's like that juxtaposition, and that's where I think like in certain ways, you know, that sort of confidence, and that's kind of what the US has. Like there's a
mhm.
lot of problems, no doubt, but the US has this confidence of to move on, to like recognize the setbacks and just move on. I mean, the US has also a major tragedy in its history, not just World Trade Center, but you know, there's a lot of unresolved issues in the US as well. But I think some of that ethos of you know, it's like, okay, we acknowledge the setbacks, but then we move on and pivot, you know, with a more optimistic outlook to the future that
Mm.
Germany can take some notes from, for sure, you know, and I would like to see, you know, like, I mean, honestly, if I'm looking around Berlin,
Yeah.
which, you know, in contrast to Frankfurt might be underrated, I think Berlin is overrated. Um, it's a great city, but like what has been built here that's like really groundbreaking or inventive, or, you know, that's like sort of really kind of excites people for the last 20 years, like I really couldn't point to anything. I mean, that's sort of like, it's a city with a lot of dynamic.
Mm.
Um, but you know, of things of like that's actually like, you know, looking forward, it can do more of that. Like it can take some more cues and be a bit daring and try to do things that, and it's not just building, but I mean, there's like things that you can do that connect people in a better way.
I
Um,
see.
and so but I think that was like, that was to me, that was like very vivid when I was in New York and saw like how they processed that tragedy.
Mm. What you were saying now about Berlin and Frankfurt, that's very interesting. You know, Berlin has a vision mission in a way, right? Seems to, and that's what's attracting to the people. And Frankfurt is maybe more like Germany, no? There's a lot of money here, but there's no vision and no mission really for Frankfurt. At least this is how I perceive it, right? And so
I
it lacks bonding. And
Yeah, I think Berlin has lost a lot of the vision that it used to have. Like I think it was, so I mean that's kind of one of the tragedy, because I do think there's a lot of dynamic here and there's a lot of
yeah.
potential. But one of the things that made, you know, Berlin a dynamic city was like was cheap housing. And
Really, but internationally, I thought people thought it was cool. Brad Pitt came to Berlin
yeah,
and said it's
yeah,
really cool. I love it here. I can walk around like a free person, no cameras following me all the time and stuff. Isn't that
yeah.
a cool image Berlin has globally?
I mean, Berlin still has the live and let live atmosphere, which I like
Yeah.
a lot. It's not, you know, it is very open in that sense, but it also is very troubled in other like senses. I mean, IYY, who's lived here for several years, like he absolutely despises Berlin these days, because he thinks it's very closed. And there's been like other people like and you know, and I like in the vision that, you know, compared to if you look across what Paris is doing in terms of like trying to recreate its transit system and make a more human city. Berlin isn't really doing that. And it's like, if, you know, for me, like a personal tragedy is like the East Side Gallery, which is a monument renowned, but it's kind of not really appreciated much in Berlin.
Mhm.
And you can tell that by the fact that it's like the parked cars, like there's like maybe 2 meters of pavement where people can walk by it, and then a line of parked cars. Like, you know, why don't
Okay.
you celebrate that? Like that's, to me, it's like it's just sort of, that's a lost opportunity,
Yeah.
you know?
Yeah,
It's a
totally.
monument. It's a, you know, the city's division was an important part of the city's history. And to recognize that division is important, and not to like sort of take an eraser and try to pretend it didn't exist, you know? And so like just the fact that like how the East Side Gallery is sort of dismissed by the city is not necessarily the most like constructive approach to also, you know, back to reunification. It's like important to recognize those monuments and those divisions and also the mistakes that were made during reunification. Um,
Interesting.
so anyways, that's,
Okay, but we're moving a bit away from your
yeah.
book, right? It's very interesting, but maybe a separate video, because what we wanted to talk about is really, why is Germany totally kaputt? And that's where we came from. And you say one of the reasons is also Germany is very, very fragmented. We touched that just now. The East-West, Will, which you said, the rich versus poor, the digital elite versus the analog bureaucracy, God, which I experienced really with the Insolvenzverwalter, because
Hmm.
they still had to carry all the documents during Corona in, how do you say, in the Ordner.
Hmm. Yeah.
You know, because
Binders.
yeah, it wasn't digitalized. So can you
Hmm.
imagine how long it all took? It was incredible, right? So is Merz's government bridging these gaps now or entrenching them, Will?
I think it's a bit too early to say, um, because it's kind of early days in the coalition. There are signs that some of the things that they could do might entrench some of the gaps. I mean, they're going to cut back on welfare. They've said that they'll have to balance the book, so that could kind of increase the gap between um, bec- bec- between kind of rich and poor and make life harder for some people. And I think that needs to be, obviously Germany needs to perhaps become more competitive and become more dynamic, but that does create losers, and that would be a difficult gap for the government to manage. On other ones, I haven't seen, apart from as Chris mentioned earlier, the speech in the Bundestag where he said he's going to be a chancellor for all Germans. I haven't seen anything that suggests that they're going to make a big effort to heal East-Western divisions, and I think that's something that concerns me, as in like that's obviously kind of the mother of all German divisions, and it's still festering, and there doesn't seem to be any big new bold ideas to kind of push that one forward. I think I was talking to a female manager at a major, I won't say which company, but a big world famous German company yesterday. And she was kind of saying, I'm a bit concerned about what they're going to do about, improving women's standing in Germany, which is often quite backward. You see women underrepresented in managerial roles and in kind of high levels of government, local, regional, federal. And she was
Due
concerned
to
that
Merz or due to Trump? She's worried.
she was saying Merz. She was, her point was she thinks some of the energy that you saw before that there has been occasionally on that will go out, and it's not something that interests him. This is a person who's not like from a super left wing or kind of green or thing background. It's kind of a business person who was saying she was a bit concerned that there won't be energy on that front going forward, which is interesting. But I think it's
Overall trend, right?
yeah. I think, but to be fair on Merz and his government, it's too early to say. And one thing that happens quite often, this wouldn't be the first time in Germany that people could end up being positively surprised by a chancellor. And people had low expectations for Angela Merkel, and obviously we're critical on some things that she did domestically in her book, but internationally she was a major success. But no one really saw that coming at the start, and this is an opportunity also for Merz to stand up and kind of show that maybe people have underestimated his abilities to kind of to heal some of these divisions. But we'll have
Just
to.
if I just like chime in like on a positive note, it's like for the first time Germany has a digital ministry, and the head of the digital ministry is someone from business, which is also like breaking the mold, which is like also been critical or criticized from some people because is there conflicts of interest potentially also with Katharina Reiter as the economy minister from coming from the energy sector. But I mean, I think it's at least shows a willingness to try new things, and it's like overdue that there's more of a concerted effort for digital ministry and state modernization is what that new ministry is called. Is so that's a positive sense, and it's positive like so. To be optimistic that like they recognized some issues, and Merkel had also like talked about a digital ministry. It never happened, and now it's happening. So, and they're taking people with practical real world experience, which is I think positive. Like the conflicts of interest, and lobbyism, you have to like pay attention to, but at least it's like the potential for new ideas, which I think is really positive.
You mentioned, sorry, Will, you want to add something?
And I think that's a good point to make. Another optimistic point about Germany is one, it's not starting from it's faces major challenges. There's still real kind of substance here, and there's so many things that Germany now does worse than other countries, and that creates actually, instead of being downbeat about that, creates huge potential upside.
Positive thinking, yeah, resilience, strong.
But I mean, if you start, there's things like you look on international league tables, and Germany average internet speeds are kind of only half as fast as somewhere like Thailand. But this offers like a massive opportunity to improve things, and the same on digital skills. Like I think in Hessen, it's still correct that there's no formal IT teaching in schools, or there's no schools aren't obligated to do. There's no obligation for schools to do that from the curriculum. And you think if you start just like modernizing, and one of the points you make in the book is if you start making little positive steps, then it can gather momentum and it could become Germany could start seeing real momentum on these things, and it's a real like momentum on the improvement front. And that's another positive thing. I think if you look at countries like the UK, they've kind of tried a lot of things, and it's you look at some of the UK problems and you think like, what new can you try there to kind of improve things? But in Germany, some things are so behind that there's massive opportunity
I like that. I
to
really like this, right? There's hope. It's so bad, so it can only get better, but maybe we
well, yeah, or just more. I mean, that's one way of looking at it. And I do realize the point can seem a bit critical in itself, but it is true. I mean, if you started getting really looking high and trying to get digital economy like much stronger and try and replicate some of the stuff that some of the more dynamic Asian economies do, then there's huge potential upside. I mean, just as I was on the train from Frankfurt to Berlin yesterday, and it was almost
Mhm.
impossible to work for most of the journey because there were a lot of people on the train and the internet connection didn't work. I mean, fixing things like that would enable,
drive at least, or you were late and stopped all time.
we were a bit late as well. Yeah. But again, it's another area where Germany is still one of the world's leading economies in Europe's economic motor with all these bits going wrong. So if you start fixing them, there's huge like upside potential there, I think.
May I ask you an open question? It's so interesting, to talk to you too about this. I mean, America, UK, with your experience living in Germany also. I mean, I just heard on the Wirtschaftsrat in Berlin, yeah, I mean, Germany, we're always very negative, and very critical and rather hesitant moving forward. So totally agree with everything you're writing in the book. But on the other hand, the perception made in Germany, also regarding the products and the quality abroad, many people said is still excellent. Is that true? Is that also your
Yeah.
perception? Yeah, what you hear?
Yeah, definitely. Yeah. I mean, I think that is like was built up over like decades of really well made. I mean, it's still you would pay like consider to pay a premium if it's made in Germany. So, I mean, and that's like sort of what Will was talking about, that there's enough substance here. Like despite like these issues that are going on, there's still so much substance that that it's a good base to work off. Like it's not like it's not a tear down, and start it over. It's like adding, it's adding some momentum, it's adding some flourishes. It's like, and so and addressing the issues and sort of that, and that's kind of what the book is about, is sort of identifying these issues as kind of in as much depth and show the links between them, but also to show that like the reason to be hesitant to change is really not going to work anymore. You can't rely and sit back and just expect the status quo to continue. Like there needs to be work now, to take place, but the substance is there. So yeah, made in Germany is still like, there's still like obviously like Trump and like his policy towards bringing back manufacturing is in a way he's realized that, and there's probably a bit of like Schadenfreude or not Schadenfreude, but like a bit of Neid about Germany and a bit of envy that Germany has like maintained manufacturing throughout the decades where the US hasn't. So, like that's something that Germany should, take part of, but it's also can't just rest on just manufacturing. There needs to be other things added to it like that are a bit more, so it's more about like the creativity. But yeah, made in Germany, like manufacturing base, it's strong, it's good, it's something to like, like so that the country can take with.
Like you said, built on, right?
Yeah.
So interesting always to see how different the perception, internal and external perception is. But you mentioned a lot of really interesting aspects, which I'm still chewing on, but not chewing in a positive way. I'm not sure if that's the English way, I was very impressed and they said, yes, true. Why is that so, But maybe I would like with my last question end with some hope. And I mean, if you had to bet on Germany making a turnaround, what's the most likely path back to strength? What would a success story look like, really? I mean, Bloomberg style.
Mhm. Well, I mean, a success story would be, I mean, there's a lot of things they could do. Like I think Germany will get back to growth, just from the amount of money that's going on. But I think using this growth to, like I think one of the most fundamental issues is getting housing back on track, getting that sense of optimism, taking that anxiety away from the people. Like because if you're worried about the roof over your head, it's hard to like get
Mhm.
positive. So, I mean, and then what it looks like is, um, I mean, so whether I would bet on Germany to make the turn, like I hope Germany makes the turn, whether I would bet on it. I mean, I think it doesn't have a lot of choice, but to like make these changes, and I think
Mhm.
like Merz and the government have realized things need to get done differently, and there is an openness to speeding up the state. I mean, the one thing that the state can do in politics is cutting down bureaucracy. And I think one of the things that they could do, if it would be, is to streamline, take a specific sector, like if it's, residential housing construction or something like that, and just focus on one, specific area as to show that they can make a difference, and completely digitalize that, make it across, the sector, and something that people can, you know, then that becomes like a tangible, and what Will was saying, then it gets this dynamic rolling. So
Yeah.
if you take like one specific area, radically cut the bureaucratic processes involved, make, really make like residential housing a national agenda, um, and not just like rental housing, but also, for house like buy to own housing. I think that's like one thing, like at least like it's to me that's very present and something that has to be done. There's lots of other things that can be done as well, but I think that would take the anxiety away from people and show if you can start getting like houses going up and rents coming down, and then that would give working class and a lot of like regular people the sense that the government is capable of action and is capable of solving the pain that people feel on a daily basis. So like I think that's just my 2 cents
Okay,
on
from
that.
all the proposals you have in your book, that is the one you would say as the most relevant, really.
Like
Okay,
I think that's, yeah, we branded it like Habitat for Heimat, you know,
Habitat for
because
Heimat, yeah, I saw
yeah.
that, yeah.
So like, and just as an idea of like, but it's not just the only thing, but it's like, I think that's like very pressing, and it's like, that takes unfortunately a long time too. But I think you could start like showing that, like if you would have, and sort of communicate that to the people in a way that's not too too bureaucratic and too like just for the specialists, but
Mhm.
that shows like this is how it's going to, bring down your rent. It's gonna, make you, it's gonna give people options. It's gonna make the economy and society more dynamic and more secure. I think
Interesting.
that's what the
And Will, what is your first choice or recommendation?
Just to get back to the question, will Germany make the turnaround? I think definitely yes. I think Germany has been through far worse before and come out. I think there's a creativity, work ethic, energy that as a foreigner you can really see. So I think that just the question is there's two things. I think how far down the current path does it want to go before people really start changing, and you have like a kind of from people, there's support for kind of getting out of the way of enterprise and people's energy, and how far down the path does Germany want to go? And then the other one would be, I think the country needs to be very careful to avoid like a fatalism that can sometimes creep in and has crept in other countries where, and arguably that's true of my own, where people are just like, oh, there's nothing we can do, and you just decline, 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 and people lose kind of just become too fatalistic about German situation. So I think a question of how soon does the turnaround come, and avoiding kind of a negative fatalism about where the country's headed. And then I think if those, if those two can be avoided, then Germany will have the turnaround. And I think they probably will. And I'm kind of feel more secure in the idea that it will do. And Germany's been through worse before. And yeah.
Okay. Yeah, thank you very much for your time. I know it's really always difficult, to touch all the aspects in a book. I mean, it's very complex. I hope we touch the most relevant ones all the way. By the way, we will put the comments of the German and the English book here in the comments, the links. And I'm sure if you want to get in touch with Chris or with Will, if you have further questions, don't hesitate, get in touch with them. And Chris and Will, is there anything else which is really important to you, which we haven't touched, and what you like to mention regarding your book?
Well, I think if I just like Claudia, thank you very much for the opportunity and the time, and really appreciate it. And so I think it's just like that idea what Will was touching on at the end is just the confidence and that Germany like can and should have. And it
Yeah.
really doesn't take that much, like I really think like it's a bit of like dynamic, it's a bit of like sort of just this idea, like trying to find ways to live this idea of community that is difficult right now and that's very strained, but it doesn't really take that much. And there's like little ways that people can do to like every day to like live that idea of community. And then that like creates a dynamic on its own, just the optimism. So I guess that's like for me like the final word that as maybe so dire as like the headline sounds, totally kaput. The message is really actually like constructive, and that Germany has, like what Will was saying, like has the potential to turn things around, and it takes less than maybe a lot of people with a lot of fatalism, like think that it's so hard, but I don't think it has to be that hard.
Yeah. And again, thanks so much for having us, Claudia. It's been a really interesting chat. And yeah, just to add to Chris, I think the title of the book is aimed at the sharp tone in the title of the book are aimed at fatalism. It's not aimed at Germany, as a major criticism of Germany. You just can't get fatalistic about these problems that we all know are there. And if we can tackle them and be more optimistic, then there's a great future ahead for Germany.
Yeah, thank you very much for your time. And I mean, you are so right, totally kaput. And there is a lot of truth about it. Germany is totally kaput. On the other hand, I thought, a country that develops words like Weltschmerz and what was the other one I took out? Yeah, Zukunftsangst, which are really hard to translate. And on the other hand, you really have the highest numbers of hidden champions. I mean, this is so diverse, in a way. There must underlie some creativity here. Maybe, Germany can manage, like you suggest, and we all hope, to move forward and to get a turnaround, because we have to. I guess it's our last opportunity, really, right? If we don't manage now, there may have another government. The AfD may be in place then, right?
Yeah, that's the risk. Yeah.
That's
but that's the thing that Merz, I mean, that's the other positive thing. Merz and the existing government like talk about that risk, and they're aware of that risk, so it's hopefully they find the right channels to address that. So
yeah. Okay, thank you very much, you two.